You know, when you dig into history, you find some absolutely wild stories about how people come to power. But the origin of the Kalachuri Dynasty, it's really something else. It's a story that doesn't start with a big battle or a royal decree. Nope. It starts in the private rooms of a king who was, well, terrifying.
I mean, it's a fair question, isn't it? It totally sounds like something out of a myth or a fairy tale. But for the Kalachuris, this is their actual founding story. So let's paint a picture here.
Okay, so picture this. We're way back in the 6th century, in a place called Kalanjara Durga. And the guy in charge, King Kshatriya, well, he's not just your run-of-the-mill tyrant. The stories say he was a cannibal, a guy so feared he wouldn't let any strangers near his palace. You can just imagine the kind of fear that gripped this whole kingdom. So, in this world of total fear and paranoia, the king has this one blind spot. The only person he trusted, like completely, his barber. And we're not talking about just any barber here. This guy was smart, he was clever, and he slowly worked his way into becoming the king's #1 confidant.
And this is where the story takes a wild turn. The barber is supposedly just doing his job, grooming the king, when he sees his chance. And boom, he ends the tyranny right then and there. And the people, they were so desperate for a hero, they didn't even blink. They hailed him as their new ruler. And just like that, a barber becomes a king and starts a whole new dynasty. Incredible, right?
All right, so that's the legend. But out of this wild story comes a real, honest-to-goodness historical dynasty. So let's get into who the Kalachuris actually were. Even their name is pretty cool. Kalachuri probably comes from two words, kala, which could mean stone or maybe even mustache, and churi, which means a sharp sword. So a sharp sword on a stone, or maybe a guy with a sharp mustache. Either way, you get the picture, right? It's all about strength and being sharp.
And that totally fits with their royal symbol. They chose the Suvarna Vrishaba, the golden bull. I mean, what a powerful image, right? It's all about projecting strength, toughness, basically all the things you need if you want your dynasty to stick around for a while. But their story isn't just one smooth upward climb. After that legendary start in the 6th century, they kind of faded away, overshadowed by another power, the Chalukyas. But here's the thing. They didn't just vanish. It took a while, but about 600 years later, they came roaring back in the south. And it was all because of one very, very ambitious guy. And that brings us to the main event, really. We've got to talk about the dynasty's most famous ruler, Immadi Bijjalaa. This is the man who didn't just bring the Kalachuri name back from the history books, he built an entire empire around it. So this is the guy Immadi Bijjalaa. And get this, he didn't start out as royalty. He began his career as a feudatory, which is basically a lord who works for the real emperors, the Chalukyas. But you can tell he wasn't content to stay in that role for long. His path to power was super smart. He was patient, he was strategic, he basically just waited for the Chalukya leadership to show a little weakness, and then, in 1153, he pounced. He declared independence. And it wasn't a small thing. In less than 10 years, he had carved out this huge kingdom for himself. The Kalachuris were back, and they were a big deal. And what's one of the first things you do when you become a new emperor? You get a new capital. He shifted his base from Mangalavada to Kalyana. And this wasn't just a change of address. It was a huge symbolic statement. He was telling everyone, this isn't just some little uprising. This is a new empire, and I'm in charge. But here's what's really interesting about Bijjalaa's reign. It wasn't just about winning battles and taking territory. Once he established that political stability, it created this amazing space for culture, philosophy, and art to just blossom. His court became a magnet for some of the most brilliant minds of the time. And the most famous of them all was Jagajyothi Basavana. This guy was a total game changer. He was a social and religious reformer who looked at the rigid caste system and said, nope, we can do better. He pushed for a society where people were more equal, and his ideas just lit a fire, sparking this huge wave of spiritual thinking and, as a result, a ton of support for the arts. And you know what's amazing? You can still see a piece of this legacy today. If you ever find yourself in the Shivamoga district, you can see the Kedareshwar temple. It was built around 1160, right when Bijjalaa was at the absolute peak of his power. It's still standing, a beautiful testament to just how skilled they were back then. But here's the tragic part of the story. For all of its brilliance, this golden age, well, it didn't last long. In fact, it was shockingly short. The end came for Emperor Bijjalaa and his whole southern empire, and it was fast and it was brutal.
I mean, check out how quickly this all went down. In 1167, Bijjalaa is at the height of his power, and he decides to abdicate. He just hands the throne over to his son. Seems fine, right? But then, just 1 year later, he's assassinated. It's just a whiplash ending for a guy who had built so much. And once the great leader was gone, the empire he built just fell apart. It didn't take long. By 1184, that's less than 20 years after Bijjalaa's death, the Chalukyas came right back in and took over. And just like that, the southern Kalachuri Empire was finished.
So it leaves you with this really big question, doesn't it? The Kalachuri Dynasty, as a name, as an idea, it lasted for 600 years. But its most glorious moment, this incredible empire in the south, it was all over in less than a generation. So what truly defines a legacy? Is it the power you hold for a little while? Or is it the ideas, the art, the buildings you leave behind for everyone else to see centuries later?